I'm not colouring my comic. Not because I don't want to, but because I'm worried that if I do, I'll ruin it. You may have similar fears. Maybe you're scared about the inking, or maybe you're scared to start it in the first place. Well, in this video, we're going to get rid of that fear and we're going to come up with a plan so that you don't feel worried about ruining your comic. Usually when we're paralysed by fear, we think that we don't have the skills to pull it off. We're worried that we're not quite good enough to make it work, whether that's the inks or the colours or even the thumbnails. So we stay where we're comfortable and hope that one day we'll get the appropriate skills to finish our comics. The problem with that is that you're going to end up waiting forever with an unfinished script or an unfinished comic because you're looking at your skill set in the wrong way. I would be fearful of colouring my comic because I would say to myself that I'm not good enough. Even if I didn't compare myself to other comic creators, which is easier said than done, I wouldn't have the confidence to colour my own comic. But then I started to think about what we mean when we say that we're not good enough to do something. I mean, what does that mean? What does it look like to be good enough at something? To be as good as an artist that you admire? How long will it take to get to that point? And when you do get there, can you guarantee that you'll still feel good enough to work on your comic? Lots of questions with very few answers, so I started digging and this is what I came up with. I think that for a lot of us, we judge our skills in art or comic creation in a really unfair way. Skills are relative, right? For example, for someone who doesn't make art at all, they might look at my work and think that I'm a really good artist, because relative to them, my skills are better. And I may look at other artists and think that my work is bad because relative to them, my skills are worse. And the thing is, there'll always be another creative who, relative to you, is better. And if you look at it that way, all that's doing is feeding into this idea that you're not good enough. And so we need to break that cycle that's keeping us in that fear, and we can do that by changing how we look at our goals. It's one thing to have goals or requirements to be good enough or better, but that's not really useful to you because it's not specific enough. Also, as we've already mentioned, your idea of getting better is going to change over time anyway. You're going to constantly move the goalposts. So instead of that, we're going to figure out why we're feeling unconfident in our abilities in the first place. This is the first step in finding a goal that's going to have a real impact on our creativity and will stop us from feeling scared to try stuff. For me, colour has always been the sticking point, and these are the things that I feel will help me go from feeling unconfident to feeling comfortable with colouring my comic. When I try to put colours together, I'm never really sure which colours go. I'm not sure how to choose the different values based on the hues available to me. I'm not always sure why certain colour combinations work and others don't. And I'm not sure how to add atmosphere or emotion to my colours with intention instead of blind luck. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot that I need to learn when it comes to colour, but this is a really good starting point. Now all I need to do is relate my problems to tutorials and practice. That means looking up colour harmony and saturation and values, as well as looking at what options the software I have available give me. And I'm going to build up just a basic amount of knowledge so that I'm not feeling 100% clueless when it comes to colour. My goal is that I want to be able to understand the choices that I'm making when it comes to colour, even if there are better choices available to me that I might miss. So even if I could have coloured my comic better, I want to be able to understand the choices that I'm making right now. I hope that makes sense. Because ultimately that's what the point of learning the fundamentals is. When people say just learn the fundamentals when it comes to art, what they're really saying is that you need to be able to understand why the arm looks a certain way when it twists and bends and flexes. You need to understand why angles change as objects move away from you. And you need to understand why colours harmonise. Because when you understand that, even at its most basic level, then that's when you can make choices with your art. But if you don't understand that, then you're just making marks on a page blindly. And if it ends up being good, then it's luck more than anything. And you can't rely on luck, which is why you feel unconfident. So how do you take that feeling of fear that you'll ruin your comic? Well, you can't. Not entirely anyway. Personally, I'm not going to colour my comic until I've drawn it, because not only will that give me time to do studies and practice, but also when it comes time for me to actually colour the comic, I can put a lot more energy into those individual pages rather than having to worry about the drawing as well. That's not necessarily advice because that might not work for you, but that's the reason that I'm not colouring my comic right now. And so when I do get round to finally colouring my comic, I'm still going to feel scared. I'm still going to feel worried that I'll ruin my comic, or that people with much more skill than me will judge the choices that I make. But I'm going to colour it anyway. Because if I allow my fear of ruining my comic from actually completing my comic, then I'm always going to feel this way. You've got to look at your fear of ruining your comic like the entrance to a spooky forest. You can either stand at the edge looking in, feeling uneasy and freaked out, or you can walk through it knowing that you'll get to the other side. But you've got to go in. And I think that the best way to do this is to have the best of both worlds, where you're creating your comic and you're working on your fundamentals at the same time. Because what we don't want to do is put our comic on ice while we try to get better at a particular fundamental or a group of fundamentals, because like we've always said, your perception of your skills are going to change over time, so you're always going to feel like there's a slight knowledge gap or an area that requires more improvement. So you'll just continuously push your comic to one side, and we don't want that. So we're going to use our warm-ups to acquire knowledge and our comics to acquire practice. Imagine that the warm-ups are like you understanding perfect form when it comes to lifting weights, and working on your comic is actually lifting the weights. Take the 25 minutes that you use for warm-ups, or however long you use for warm-ups, and just learn a little bit of the fundamental that you're struggling with. For me, that could be like a 25 minute of a color study by another artist, for example. And then once that timer is up, whether I finish the study or not, I dive straight into the comic. This way you're kind of forcing yourself to continue to progress forwards with your comic so that you're not putting it on ice and avoiding it for fear of ruining it. And at the same time, you're building up your knowledge over time. Because like the work that you do on your comic right now will not be the best work you ever do, but you also won't ruin it. Instead, what you'll be doing is you're acquiring knowledge and then you're applying that knowledge immediately. Your skill set will grow with each page that you complete, and your confidence will grow with it. We all want to create flawless art, or at the very least we want the flaws in our arts to be intentional and not mistakes. Just like we want the creative flair in our art to be choices rather than accidents. But the only way to get to the point where we have more control over the choices and the outputs that we create with our art is through action. And sitting on a script or a comic that hasn't been inked or a comic that hasn't been colored is not fair to you, and it's not fair to your story. I think the biggest factor that influences our skills are our mindset above everything else. When we're feeling confident and full of energy, we tend to draw better, in the same way that when we're feeling vulnerable and tired, we tend to draw worse. So if we take care of ourselves, both mentally and physically, our art is going to improve. That means not neglecting our needs like sleep and rest, and also not applying unnecessary pressure on ourselves to create perfect, flawless works of art every single time. That last sentence wasn't perfect, and I'm not going to re-record it. For my part, my mindset is that a panel is complete only when I can answer this one question. Is this panel the best it can be given my current skill set and my current circumstances? And 99 times out of 100, the answer is yes. And when I can answer yes, I can move on very quickly. And that means that I'm not too hung up on my thoughts of, oh, am I good enough? Is this good enough? Could I have done it better? Etc. And I'll be doing exactly the same thing when it comes to coloring my comic too. Do I want to go back and redraw those initial pages and panels that I did several months ago? Hell yeah. But the fact that I feel that way proves the point that you do get better as you go along. I thought those pages were great when I drew them, but now I can see the flaws in them because I'm getting better at spotting them. And you only get better at spotting your flaws when you get better at creating art. And you can only do that by working on your comic. It's not easy, and you're going to feel fear regardless of how many studies you do or how long you spend avoiding creating your comic, so you might as well start now. There are plenty of opportunities to make other comics if you're not entirely satisfied with the one you're making now. And even if you only want to make one comic in your lifetime, still make it now, because you can just do a remastered version later on when your skills improve. No choice you make is permanent, and you can change your mind whenever you want. I'm not going to lie, this video was more for me than it was for you, because I'm definitely going to need to rewatch this when it comes to me coloring my comic. But I hope it's helped you if you're feeling stuck and like you don't want to go to that next stage because you're scared that you're going to ruin everything that you've done before. Just stop putting unnecessary pressure on yourself. I guess that's the message of this video. And it's also the message of this video too, where I put unnecessary pressure on myself and recorded the entire process. So watch this one next to see someone lose their sanity.